really, I really think this is so vital, and it's so vital in the Jewish
Mm.
community. It's so vital in American society right now, um,
And families.
and families, and so many other spaces. I'm actually going to mute everybody for the beginning here for just a minute, so I don't get feedback. Um, and the key to being able to disagree well. Here's the key. I'm not going to bury the lead. I'm going to give you my conclusion at the beginning, and we'll come back to it at the end. Is first of all to not be afraid or shy away from disagreement. Oftentimes, we try to paper over differences. By papering over differences, you don't actually talk about the real issues. You don't get to the meat of things. Having somebody who you disagree with can sharpen your own views. It can make you understand your own position better. It can also, you have to also be open to sometimes changing your mind. You have to be, if you have somebody with whom you disagree who you respect, you may not come around to their opinion, but you may modify your own position. And that in turn has made you better and smarter and more thoughtful. To disagree well means to also see, what do we share? What are we in the same boat on? Um, I'm going to share a screen with a whiteboard. I'm going to just draw a quick picture here. Okay. When we, um, you know, many people say when we don't disagree well, people say, "Oh, why can't we all just be together? Why can't we all just get along and have sort of a what I will call a why can't we just all build one giant shul and all of the Jews in Kansas City come to that one shul?" Those kinds of things, and that is a very Pollyannish view and doesn't honor the disagreement. And when you don't honor the disagreement, you have a Venn diagram that looks like this. You're thinking the Venn diagram looks like this. Okay. When people are overly naive and they say, "Why can't we just all get along? Why can't we just all have this big group thing?" Have you ever noticed when there is a communal function and we say, "Oh, let's get all the synagogues and all the Jewish community together to do X, Y, or Z," and then you come to the program and there's like 12 people there, and you're like, why are there far fewer people for an event that is supposed to bring together every synagogue in the city than when our one synagogue, which is not the biggest synagogue, does something? Why is that? It's because the assumption is this Venn diagram. It's not honoring the disagreements and saying, "Oh, we have all this stuff together." Okay, so um, when that happens, we get into a situation like this. We get into a siloed disagreement. Okay, and we look like this. Okay, where we completely retreat into our own silos and we're saying, we have nothing to share and we have nothing in common with them. But if you do disagreements right, then what you do is you recognize that a disagreement is actually like this. And we honor this piece of us, and we honor this piece of us. And for the purpose of collaboration, we only focus on this piece of us. But you have to agree that there is this piece of us that we share between two communities, and we want to double down and we want to put our chips on that square on the roulette table, as it were. Does that make sense? But you have to agree that that piece exists, and that that piece is so important that it is worth investing in. So let's clear all drawings and stop share. And I'm going to pull up our text window for today. Hold on just a second. I'm just pulling up my Safari text sheet. We're going to be learning today about a holiday called the 9th of Adar. Okay. And the 9th of Adar is, okay, let me just a second. Okay. I'm going to share my screen and paste something in the chat window. In the chat window, this is, if it's easier for you to use your own web browser, here's the link of the source sheets that I'm going to use. And okay, can everybody see now? Okay. So just to give you a quick background, I'm going to jump to this first halacha. It's from the Shulchan Aruch, which is a code of Jewish law, and it's listing all the different fast days that we used to observe. We don't observe all these anymore. Okay? I'm just going to go through a few of them. On the 1st of Nisan, the sons of Aaron died. On the 10th of Nisan, Miriam died and her well disappeared. On the 26th of it, Joshua ben Nun died. On the 20th of Iyar, Eli the priest and his two sons, and the ark of God was captured. On the 26th of it, Samuel the prophet died. On the 23rd of Sivan, the offering of the first fruits in Jerusalem was canceled in the days of Yeroboam ben Nebat. On the 25th of it, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Hanina, deputy high priest, were killed. They were all killed the same day. On the 27th of it, Rabbi Hanina ben Tarjon was burned. We remember this. We read this on Yom Kippur. On the 1st of Av, Aaron the priest died. On the 18th of it, the eastern light was distinguished during the days of Achaz. On the 17th of Elul, those who slandered the land died. On the 5th of Tishrei, 20 men of Israel were killed, and Rabbi Akiba was imprisoned. On the 7th of it, a decree was against. It goes on all these different days that were minor fast days. And then we get to the end, and it says, on the 7th of Adar, Moses, our teacher, may peace be upon him, died. That's why, by the way, let me just stop sharing for just 1 second. Did Beth Shalom ever used to have a Zion Adar, a 7th of Adar dinner? Was that ever? People who have a long memory, you know who you are. Okay? We never used to have a Zion Adar dinner. Okay, a Zion Adar dinner, Zion is the 7th Hebrew letter, so Zion Adar means the 7th of Adar. And some synagogues and some communities have a Zion Adar dinner because that's the day when Moshe Rabbeinu, died. And so the fundraising dinner for the Chevra Kadisha, which is the burial society, of which its members are secret. So you come to this dinner, you don't know who's being honored because you don't know who's on the Chevra Kadisha. Some synagogues do that on the 7th of Adar as a way to raise funds for the Chevra Kadisha, for the burial society, and they do it on Moses' yard site. So I won't say it's a universal custom, but it is not an uncommon custom. And that's why I was wondering if in the old days, if they used to do that here. But for a very long time, the community has had a community-wide Chevra Kadisha, not a Beth Shalom specific one. So that might also be the reason why. But let's look. There is one other fast day that it's mentioning that we don't know about. On the ninth of it, meaning Adar, was the day when Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai divided. So it used to be that Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel were not two separate schools of thought. And it's sad when there's divisions in Israel. So it's a fast day. So what we're going to learn about is what happened on that day. What was so terrible that that happened? Okay, just a second. BF hosted a dinner for the Chevra many years ago. They might have done it on Zion Adar. Was it in the early spring, like a week before Purim? Maybe, maybe not.
We're going back maybe 30, 35 years or so ago, and BIV hosted one every year for the Chevra Kadisha. And at one point, I think maybe, I don't think they do it anymore, but I'm not sure. But I know that they did it in the spring.
Yeah, so probably because of that. Okay, if you do feel or don't feel comfortable reading today, please put, if you would, a note to me in the chat window, either to me privately or to the whole group, if you don't mind, or if you do mind, and if you don't put it in there and I call on you and you don't want to read, there's no shame in saying I don't feel comfortable reading today. Okay. Susan Leibovitz, can you be our first reader, please? Source number 6, Eruvin 13b. That means that it is from the tractate, the section of the Talmud called Eruvin, the section of the Talmud that deals with all the laws of Eruv, which is that boundary, that Shabbat boundary that we construct at camps or in traditional neighborhoods. Although this section doesn't have anything to do explicitly with Eruvin. So Susan, if you can please read.
Rabbi Abba said that Shmuel said, for 3 years, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel disagreed. These said, the halakha is in accordance with our opinion. And these said, the halakha is in accordance with our opinion. Ultimately, a divine voice emerged and proclaimed, both these and those are the words of the living God. However, the halakha is in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel. The Gemara asks, since both these and those are the words of the living God, why were Beit Hillel privileged to have the halakha established in accordance with their opinion?
Hold on just a second. I'm just going to scroll up so you can read towards the center of the page.
Thank you. The reason is that they were agreeable and forbearing, showing restraint when affronted. And when they taught the halakha, they would teach both their own statements and the statements of Beit Shammai. Moreover, when they formulated their teachings and cited a dispute, they prioritized the statements of Beit Shammai to their own statements in deference to Beit Shammai.
Okay, so to summarize, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel disagreed for 3 years. And finally, after the conclusion of 3 years, literally a voice from heaven came out and said, both these and those are the words of the living God, but the halakha, the way that ultimately you have to make a decision for how a community goes, right? Like the Supreme Court might have a minority opinion that's listed, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg may have her opinion entered into the record as a dissenting opinion, but ultimately the law for a community has to go in one way and not the other. And so the Talmud asks the question, why did the Bat Kol, this magical heavenly voice, choose Beit Hillel? He said, because Beit Hillel was more polite in the way that they articulated their opinions. They had a gentle way about them. And they had so much respect for Beit Shammai. They actually put Beit Shammai's opinion before their own. I want you to think about how rare that happens in today's society. Okay. Now, I'm going to read this one because there's a lot of unusual Hebrew in it, and it is I'm going to read it because it has like a lot of unusual Hebrew words in it, and I just want to explain it. Okay. Beit Shammai permits the rival wives to the surviving brothers, and Beit Hillel prohibits them. So I'm going to, you know what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to actually, so I can see everybody's beautiful faces, I am going to copy this and put it in the screen, in the chat window. So I can see everybody and we can look at the text in the screen window. In the chat window, rather. Okay. So there is a concept that you need, two concepts that you need to know before I read this text. The first is the concept of what's called yibum. Okay. Yibum is levirate marriage. Levirate marriage is when if there is a husband and wife and the husband dies and they didn't have any children, the surviving brother needs to marry the widow. Okay. And then there's this whole ceremony that goes on if he doesn't want to marry her, where he spits in her shoe. Okay, that's called chalitza. It's this weird, strange ceremony. It is not done outside the land of Israel anymore. It was done continuously by Sephardic communities, and it is done in Israel occasionally. Happens very rarely, but it does happen. Now the question comes in, what happens if the other brother is married? If the surviving brother is already married? Well, polygamy was only prohibited in Judaism 1,000 years ago. So at the time of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, it used to be that men could have multiple wives. Okay. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Yeah, I've actually had conversations with friends, and it's so funny. Like, I had this one good friend in Dallas, and she's actually the daughter of a conservative rabbi. And she was saying, you know what? I actually would be perfectly fine with having multiple wives. When I'm sick of my husband, he can go hang out with one of those other wives. And that'd be great. And I'd have a girlfriend around here and talk to all the time. She says, I'm totally fine with it. So I think she was joking, but not 100%. Don't ask me what percentage. So the question comes in, what if the surviving husband is already married? And what if he's already married to one of the widow's sisters? And now it's sort of like 7 brides for 7 brothers. And but now is more like Jacob marrying Rachel and Leah, which we don't really do. Even when there was polygamy allowed in the rabbinic period, they didn't do that. And there's all sorts of issues about when you have a forbidden marriage. If you have a forbidden marriage and you have offspring from that forbidden marriage, those are called in the halakha category of mamzerim. Okay, mamzerim are illegitimate children, and it's a really serious thing. We try to avoid mamzerim at all costs. We never try to put anybody in a position to have a child who's considered an illegitimate child. And so that's why, for example, the conservative movement insists on people getting a get before we remarry them. Okay, because if there's any offspring, we don't want anybody to think, God forbid, that they would be mamzerim. So that you need that. I'm going off on that tangent so you understand this text. You also need to know about mamzerim is mamzerim are forbidden from marrying anybody else other than other mamzerim for 10 generations. It's awful. It's awful. I mean, I can't even go into how awful it is. So we do everything to avoid it. So now let's look at this text up in the chat window. Beit Shammai permits rival wives to the surviving brother. Okay, and Beit Shammai prohibits them. Okay, and if they perform the chalitza, Beit Shammai disqualifies them from marrying a priest, because there's all sorts of rules about who can marry a priest. If it's can a divorcee, blah, 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 all the other people. In other words, do they fall into that category? And Beit Shammai makes them eligible. If they performed yibum, Beit Shammai makes them eligible to marry a priest, and Beit Hillel disqualifies them. Though these forbid, and these permit, and these disqualify, and these make eligible, Beit Shammai did not refrain from marrying the women from the families of Beit Hillel, nor did Beit Hillel refrain from marrying the women from the families of Beit Shammai. And with regard to purity and impurity, which these declare pure and others declare impure, neither of them refrained from using the utensils of the others from preparation of food that was ritually clean. In other words, what this text is saying is that even though these two communities had very, very significant differences when it came to what is kosher ending of a marriage and remarriage, even though they had different standards of what made something pure and impure, even though they disagreed on these elements, for some reason, and we don't know the reason why, they didn't stop marriages between the two families, and they didn't stop from borrowing each other's dishes. The Talmud kind of does somersaults to explain that actually there was divine intervention to make sure that though the children who were of questionable offspring, or of offspring in a situation that the two communities would disagree about, there was divine intervention to make sure that those boys and girls only fell in love with people from their own sub-tribe, only other people from either Beit Hillel or Beit Shammai. I think that's possible, but I think it belies the bigger issue, which is that essentially what they're saying is they didn't make a general rule prohibiting interaction between the two communities. I would, let me talk about, let's take for an example, the issue of glatt kosher meat, which is appropriate since we're remembering Gertie Epstein today, because the Epstein family were purveyors of kosher meat for this community for a very long time. And actually, one of the first things that Gertie shared with me when I met her is she was telling me that in the 1930s, there were 6 or 7 kosher butchers in Kansas City, which, since on a good day, there's boneless chicken breasts at the kosher hen house and they haven't run out. On a good day, that's my luck. To think that I'd have a choice of 6 butchers to go to is an embarrassment of riches. And it used to be that Jews would, traditional Jews, observant Jews, would eat kosher meat that wasn't glatt. Okay, glatt kosher means that the lungs of the animal, and it's only applicable to cows. So if you see chicken that's marked glatt kosher, that's like seeing bottled water that's marked gluten-free, okay? You never need to worry about gluten in bottled water, and you don't need to worry about your chicken being glatt, okay? But so glatt means the lungs in the animal are smooth when they dissect the animal and they're butchering it. In other words, it's still kosher. The cut is kosher, the animal is kosher, and there are not lesions big enough in the animal to render it unkosher. However, there are some small lesions on the lungs, but not enough to render it unkosher, but just not glatt. That animal is still kosher. Nowadays, as segments of the Orthodox community have moved further right, everybody is only eating glatt kosher meat, and you can't even buy non-glatt kosher meat. Every kosher meat that you buy at Costco or Trader Joe's or Hen House, it'll almost always say glatt on it. So imagine one family that keeps glatt kosher and one family that doesn't keep glatt kosher. This is like the glatt kosher family saying to the non-glatt kosher family, I can't come over to your house for a barbecue. Instead of saying, I'm going to come over for the Lag Bomer barbecue tomorrow night, but can you please buy the hot dogs that are glatt kosher and not the hot dogs that are kosher but non-glatt? Does that make sense? In other words, they're still within the framework of keeping kosher, but the glatt people say, we do keep this stringency. Will you please honor this stringency? And then the non-glatt person says, oh, yes, of course, because I care so much about having you as my guest in my home. Of course, I'll spend the extra $2 on hot dogs. What do I care? I want you as my guest. By the way, in the same way that today, if I have a gluten-free person or a vegan or something like that, I'm not going to say, no, you must eat my glutinous food. You must eat meat if you're coming over to my house. No, not only that, I go an extra mile and I buy the gluten-free dessert so they can feel like a mensch at dessert. I even go further than that. If I have a vegan, I'll sometimes serve a vegan main course so that we're all eating the same food, you know? That's the way you show respect. It's the way you show respect. And so what could have happened with Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel is they might have, in fact, differentiated on those issues of stringency, but said as a general rule, we're still going to borrow each other's dishes. We're still going to marry each other's kids. Any questions before I move on to the next text? Okay.
No, but thanks for the nice memory of Epstein's. I used to go in there with my bubby all the time.
Okay, you're welcome, and I wish that it was open when I was here. I would have, to think about having a choice of more than 2 grocery stores to go to is like, oh. Okay. Let me look at my chat window really quick. Okay. Marge, did I have you read already?
Not today. I'm glad to read.
Good. Good. If you can read Shabbat 17a.
Okay. Shammai said to him, if you provoke me and insist that there is no difference between gathering olives and grapes, then in order not to contradict this, I will decree impurity on the gathering of olives as well.
Pause for just one moment. What they're talking about is the ritual impurity, tum'ah, is transferred by liquid. Dry foods don't get it. And there is different kinds of liquid that is excreted from grapes and from olives during their time of harvest. Grapes excrete a little bit of juice. It's not yet wine, but a little bit of moisture and juice. And olives excrete some oil. And so there was a differentiation between, in the time of harvest, do we make an assumption that one is susceptible to ritual impurity, the other isn't? And Hillel said there's no difference between them. And Shammai says there is a difference between them. He says, not only that, if you tell me that there's no difference, then I'm going to be forced to take this stringent position on everything. And I will say that all of your olives, as well as all of your grapes, are ritually impure. And so, and it, in other words, this argument escalated and escalated and escalated. Okay, and Marge, and continuing with, they related that since the dispute was so intense.
They related that since the dispute was so intense, they stuck a sword in the study hall, and they said, one who seeks to enter the study hall, let him enter, and one who seeks to leave may not leave.
They
So
brought, pause there. The disagreement got so bad that they brought a weapon into a house of study. Imagine, and they said, we're going to take the vote on this halakha with whoever is in the room right now. And I'm putting a sword in the ground, and you cannot leave. In other words, I'm gonna take, it's like when a legislature takes a vote in the middle of the night, or when they pack a court, or doing something like this to make sure they get the votes that they need, and either through subterfuge or in this case violence, make sure that the vote goes according to their way. Okay, keep going, Marge.
One who seeks to enter the study hall, let him enter, and one who seeks to leave may not leave, so that all of the sages who assemble to determine, so that all of the sages will be assembled to determine the halakha. That day Hillel was bowed and was sitting before Shammai like one of the students. And the Gemara said, and that day was as difficult for Israel as the day the golden calf was made, as Hillel, who was the Nasi, was forced to sit in submission before Shammai, and the opinion of Beit Shammai prevailed in the vote conducted that day. And Shammai and Hillel issued the decree, and the people did not accept it from them. And their students came and issued a decree, and the people accepted it from them. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So they did accept it.
So read my little comment on this here.
Text does not paint a pretty picture, as pretty a picture of Hillel and Shammai. This shows that shows them as just the opposite. This is the day when such deep disagreement and the method of disagreement literally brought violence into the house of Torah study. This is why the later sages declared 9 Adar as a fast day, because it led to a total separation between Shammai and Hillel.
Right.
Wow.
This is a very different picture than the disagreement picture that I showed earlier between, oh, even though we have this disagreement, our kids will marry your kids, you'll borrow our dishes, we'll borrow your dishes. What's interesting about the Talmud, and some of you I see from my Melton class from last night, and this is what I tried to bring on my Melton class last night, is the richness of the Talmud is that it contains both of these stories. Mm-hmm. Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel are capable of both kinds of behaviors. Of both the behavior that allows for a disagreement where we see and respect the side of the other, and we find ways around it in such a way that we can let our kids marry each other, and we can eat off each other's dishes. But then there's another side that's much sadder. And that side is that they bring a sword into the Beit Midrash. That it literally leads to violence. Esther, I see a hand.
Yes, I don't understand. For years, we've been studying from any classes I've taken, comparing the two houses, but I've never heard that it was a house divided at any point. This is so interesting after all the years of hearing both of their sides of an
This
argument.
is the story where they became literally two separate houses. Up until this point, they studied in the same house, the same Beit Midrash together. And after this, they separated and they said, we're going to try to find ways to agree on some things, but we can't study together. It's tragic.
I have a very interesting short aside because of the way Israelis versus, and I know this is Talmud, this is Jewish, but Israelis argue. We had a short story that we had an Israeli foreign exchange student when Josh was 16 and he was 16. And I'd gone along at Blue Valley North, no issues before. And the first time I'm called into the principal's office was because of Itamar. And he said to me, we have talked to Itamar and talked to him. He cannot argue or question the teachers. He has to, it's disrespectful. And when I talked to Itamar, he said, this is what we do in Israel. We can question and argue with our teachers. He felt very, very closed and stopped from speaking his mind. And so I finally had to say to him, Itamar, you have to go along with the way school is here in Kansas City. And he said, all right, I'll do it, but I don't agree. And I thought that was very interesting because I had not been called into the principal's office until Itamar was part of my life.
I didn't bring in the text about Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, who were famous rabbinic pair whom I love very much. And they were very, very different people. And Reish Lakish dies. And Reish Lakish probably dies because of a broken heart, because of the way that Rabbi Yochanan spoke about him, actually. Their brother-in-law and sister-in-law, Rabbi Reish, and they're best of friends, and they're bar pluktas, and they disagree a lot. And after Reish Lakish dies, Rabbi Yochanan is so sad, and all of his students come up to him and try to appease him, try to make him feel better by saying, oh, the halacha agrees with you, Rabbi Yochanan. And he turns to him and he says, do you think I don't know that the halacha agrees with me? I'm the one who says that. Like, I don't need you to tell me that. When Reish Lakish was alive, he had 48 ways that he disagreed with me, and he helped make things better. And by the way, when you look at all of the innovation that has come out of Israel in the last 30 years, read Startup Nation by Dan Senor, and you read about all of the technological and intellectual innovation that's going on in Israel. I think it might be because they
can question.
They encourage it. It forces you to sharpen your arguments. It forces you to sharpen your thinking. God forbid, the teacher should be forced to rethink his or her teaching and make a more compelling argument in their lecture. So I agree with Itamar. I probably would have adoptive parented him the same way you did, but I agree with him.
Yeah, no, I told him that, that's just not the way it's done. But yeah. Anyway, that was just an aside. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you. Any other comments or questions about this separation between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel? By the way, can you think of a more powerful analogy than the editors of the Talmud saying this was as sad a day for the Jews as the golden calf? Think about what that means. The golden calf is basically saying there is not unity of God. And I'm going and separating from God and creating my own God. And this causes great division between the people and God. Bringing a weapon of violence into the hall of Torah study over an argument is like the golden calf. It's basically saying we are separating the unity where there should be unity. And we're raising it to such a level that we can no longer talk to each other. I'm going to read the final text, and I'm going to I need to end a little bit early to take care of some stuff for the Pace family. This is from Zachariah Frankel. Okay, Zachariah Frankel was actually the intellectual forefather of conservative Judaism. He was the founder of the positive historical school of Judaism in Germany, otherwise known as Wissenschaftliches Judentum. So if you thought that conservative Judaism was a bad name for a movement in Judaism, it could be worse. We could be called, Congregation Beth Shalom, a member of the Union of Wissenschaftliches Judentum. Okay, that would have been much worse. Okay, so he writes in his commentary on the Mishnah, and behold, until the days of Hillel and Shammai, disagreements of the law did not spread. And even Hillel and Shammai did not disagree except for on 3 or 4 matters. And after the death of Shammai, disagreements increased, and the flame of conflict was ignited, and anger and rage increased in the hearts of Beit Shammai. And this normally occurs when there is the inception of new opinions. And Beit Shammai went even further than Shammai himself, who stood firmly against Hillel, and they attempted to reject Beit Hillel, and even Hillel himself. In other words, Beit Shammai died, and so his students made them more radical, and that's what raised the temperature in the Beit Midrash, leading to the sword in the ground. And they attempted to reject Beit Hillel, and even Hillel himself, from practicing Jewish law in accordance with their own rulings. In other words, they said, you can't even practice Jewish law according to Beit Hillel in your own homes. You got to agree with us. They also rose up upon them with swords and spears to eliminate the opposing opinion, to establish the law as seemed right in their eyes. But over the course of time, Beit Shammai returned from their rigid ways and returned to their hearts. And not through force, a person could be victorious when dealing with Torah for its own sake, rather through thoughtful negotiation. And permission is granted to anyone to research, teach, and express his opinion. Then the peace between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel was re-strengthened, and they treated themselves in brotherliness and friendship. So what Frankel is saying is that there's actually a multi-generational gap. Notice that Hillel and Shammai, the individuals of Hillel and Shammai, are not mentioned in that first text from Eruvin, where they married each other and they shared the dishes. It just talks about Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. In the second text that I showed you, the violent one, Shammai wasn't there, Beit Shammai was there, but Hillel the elder was there. So what Frankel does is he reads this very carefully. He says, this came at a time when Shammai predeceased Hillel. Hillel was still alive, but Shammai's descendants would become more radicalized than their teacher, which often happens, right, in extremist situations. And it took multiple generations of Torah study and finding ways to disagree anew that they got to the place in Eruvin, that first text that I showed you. So this is, on one hand, you can say this is pessimistic by showing this the story of the sword. But when you read Frankel's commentary from the 19th century, it suddenly puts a potentially optimistic spin on it, because it is saying we need time to get there, but you can get there and get to this coexistence and ability to engage with each other. But it's going to take some time. And I think that when I think about both what Judaism can offer the general community, it is leading by example and teaching and demonstrating healthy ways of disagreement. And for the fissures and the divisions that exist within our own community, within the Jewish community, of which there are many. We need to do everything we can to not look for the kumbaya experience of that, those two circles that, overlap by 90%, but rather realize that we are the two circles like this, and say, what can we do? What can we do to invest in that overlap and say, for the sake of this overlap, it is worth us not digging in our heels. And that's our challenge as the Jewish community. It's a huge challenge. It is a huge challenge. And it means a lot of biting your tongue. And it means a lot of sitting on your hands. And it means a lot of gritting your teeth. And it means a lot of having faith that the long-term outcome will be better. But we're the people of hope and we're the people of faith. That's what we try to do. So thank you, everybody. I appreciate everybody's presence today. And I will not see you next week. Next week you have a guest speaker, but I will say to Amy and to Shira, thank you so much for inviting me and working with me to arrange these times. I also want to thank Jill, who already had a meeting with me, lining me up for next year's Peltzman. So the wheels are already in motion. And just want to express my gratitude to all of you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate all that you've done.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Rabbi.
It's a great class.
What?